Your phone lights up. You don't even have to open it. Just the name on the notification. Just that name. And something in your chest already moves before a single word has been read, before you know what they said, before you've had one conscious thought about it. Your shoulders pull in, your stomach drops, your breathing changes. And some part of your brain is already 3 steps ahead, already in the argument, already rehearsing what you'll say, already anticipating how this might end. That's not anxiety. That's not oversensitivity. That's your nervous system doing something very specific, something it was built to do. And understanding why it does, it changes how you see every difficult conversation you've ever had. A national survey published in May 2026 found that 85% of Americans had avoided at least one conversation in the past 30 days because they were afraid it might lead to conflict. Not 1 or 2 people. 85%. And more than a third, 35%, had done it 4 or more times in a single month. That's not a communication skills problem. That's not a generation that doesn't know how to talk. That's an enormous number of people whose nervous systems have quietly, automatically, repeatedly decided silence is safer than this. And here's what makes that decision so expensive. Unresolved conflict doesn't disappear. It doesn't just sit quietly waiting to be addressed later. It accumulates. Research on long-term relationships consistently shows that avoided conflict resurfaces, either as a sudden explosion over something that seems small, or as a slow emotional erosion that neither person can quite name. The silence feels like relief, but the cost is paid later with interest. So why does this keep happening? Why do so many people, intelligent, caring, self-aware people, repeatedly choose avoidance over engagement, even when they know avoidance isn't working? The answer isn't in their intentions, it's in their biology. There's a structure deep inside the brain called the amygdala. 2 of them, actually, one on each side, small, almond-shaped, and responsible for something enormously consequential: scanning incoming information for threat. Here's how the sequence works. Every piece of sensory data you receive, a sound, an image, a name on a screen, travels first to a relay station called the thalamus. From there, it splits. One path goes to the prefrontal cortex, the rational, reasoning part of the brain that evaluates context, considers consequences, and formulates measured responses. The other path goes directly to the amygdala, and it arrives there faster, significantly faster, milliseconds faster. The amygdala doesn't wait for the full picture. It scans for pattern matches, things that resemble stored threats from previous experience. And if it finds a match, it doesn't pause to ask follow-up questions. It fires. It activates the body's entire stress response system: adrenaline, cortisol, elevated heart rate, redirected blood flow, before the reasoning brain has finished reading the situation. Daniel Goleman, in his research on emotional intelligence, gave this a name: the amygdala hijack. And what makes it so significant is this: by the time you are consciously aware that a message upset you, your body has been in threat response for several hundred milliseconds. The reaction was not a decision. It was a reflex. The thinking brain didn't authorize it. It arrived afterward, finding a system already in motion and now trying to manage something it had no part in starting. The amygdala also cannot distinguish between physical danger and social danger. An angry text message and a raised fist activate the same threat circuitry. To the amygdala, they are the same category of event. And this isn't a malfunction. For most of human history, social threat was physical threat. Being rejected by your group, losing the trust of people you depended on, those were survival emergencies. The brain that learned to treat relational conflict as dangerous was for a long time correct. But here's what most people never notice. The amygdala isn't reading the message. It's reading the pattern, the name, the context of the last interaction, the emotional history stored in association with this relationship. It makes a threat assessment based on what this person, this tone, this kind of situation has meant before, not on what it means right now. The amygdala is accurate about history. It is terrible at distinguishing past from present. John Gottman spent decades studying couples in conflict, measuring not just what they said to each other, but what was happening in their bodies while they said it. Heart rate, cortisol levels, cardiovascular response. And what he found wasn't just about relationships. It was about physiology. He identified a specific threshold. When heart rate exceeds approximately 100 beats per minute during a relational interaction, something measurable happens to cognitive function. The ability to hold multiple perspectives, to hear accurately, to regulate emotional reactions, to respond thoughtfully rather than reactively. All of it degrades, not metaphorically, but neurologically. Gottman called this state physiological flooding, and his conclusion was precise. Above that threshold, productive conversation isn't just difficult. It is, in the most literal sense, temporarily impossible. But here's the detail that changes everything. And this is the part that most people never see coming. In Gottman's studies, when he measured the heart rates of people who had gone silent, who had shut down, stopped responding, left the room, become still and unreachable, their hearts were beating at over 100 beats per minute. The people who looked the most withdrawn, the most indifferent, the most cold, were physiologically the most overwhelmed. The external stillness was masking an internal emergency. Think about what that means for how we read the people closest to us. The partner who goes quiet, the person who suddenly gives one-word answers, the one who seems to just check out. From the outside, that behavior reads as a specific message. I don't care. You don't matter enough for me to engage. I am choosing not to show up for this conversation. But what the data shows is almost always the opposite. That person's nervous system has hit a wall. Their prefrontal cortex is offline. They are not choosing silence. They are in a physiological state in which communication, as we normally understand it, has become neurologically unavailable. The person who goes cold is not winning. They are drowning. And yet not everyone floods at the same threshold. Not everyone's heart rate spikes at the same provocation. Two people can read the same message and have entirely different body responses, one regulated, one flooding. And this difference isn't about strength or sensitivity or emotional maturity. It's about what the amygdala has learned to treat as dangerous. Attachment theory, the framework developed by John Bowlby and expanded through decades of research, describes the relational patterns that form in early childhood and then shape how the nervous system responds to closeness and conflict throughout life. The central insight for this conversation is specific. The attachment system and the threat detection system are deeply intertwined. For people who grew up in environments where conflict preceded rejection, where disagreement was followed by withdrawal, punishment, or abandonment, the amygdala encoded a very particular association. Conflict doesn't just mean discomfort. It means something bad is about to happen to this relationship. And if that relationship felt like safety, then conflict means something bad is about to happen to safety itself. That association doesn't update automatically when the environment changes. It doesn't disappear when you leave childhood, when you enter a healthy relationship, when the person across from you has never once threatened to abandon you. The nervous system carries the learned threat code forward, and it responds to a tense text message the way it learned to respond to the situations that shaped it, with a full threat response, proportionate not to the current event but to what that kind of event has historically meant. This is why the same conversation produces two such different experiences in two different people. One person's nervous system learned disagreement is uncomfortable but manageable. The other person's nervous system learned disagreement is the beginning of something much worse. Neither response is wrong. Both are accurate translations of different histories. And when those two nervous systems end up in the same conflict, one regulated, one flooding, they are not just having different emotional experiences. They are, in a measurable physiological sense, operating in different states of reality. The regulated person is having a conversation. The flooded person is having a survival emergency. Same room, same words, completely different internal worlds. This is where the most damage happens, and where the most repair becomes possible. When someone is flooded, their behavior follows a very recognizable pattern. They go quiet. Their responses shorten or stop. They look past you. Their face becomes still. They leave. And almost universally, the person witnessing that behavior reads it as a deliberate communication. Indifference, contempt, punishment, withdrawal as a choice. The person who's quiet chose silence. The person who left decided to leave. The person who went cold doesn't care enough to stay present. What the neuroscience describes is something entirely different. A person so overwhelmed that their nervous system has physically redirected resources away from language and reasoning toward basic survival circuitry. A withdrawal that is not a strategy. A silence that is not contempt, but a body-level emergency brake. Most conflict that came out of nowhere. Most relationships that were damaged by a small thing that became huge. Most silences that were interpreted as proof that someone didn't care contain this misread somewhere inside them. One person in flooding. One person translating that flooding into a statement about how much they matter. Both building cases. Neither one seeing what's actually happening. What behavioral neuroscience offers here is not a better script, not more sophisticated language, not a calmer tone of voice. It offers a sequence. Regulate the body first. Gottman's research gives a specific minimum, 20 minutes, not a 5-minute break, not a walk to the other room and back. 20 minutes is the approximate time required for cortisol to clear sufficiently for the prefrontal cortex to come back online, for the reasoning, empathizing, nuance processing parts of the brain to become available again. And that recovery only happens if the break is actually used to calm the nervous system. Not to replay the argument, not to rehearse responses, not to build the case. Mental rehearsal of conflict keeps cortisol elevated. It defeats the purpose entirely. The most important moment in a difficult conversation is often not a word spoken. It is the recognition, in yourself or in someone else, that the threshold has been crossed, that the body is no longer able to support the conversation happening right now, and that 20 minutes of actual disengagement, not silence as punishment, not withdrawal as statement, but deliberate physiological recovery, is not avoidance. It is the prerequisite for everything that comes after. There's a version of yourself that learned early that conflict was something to survive, that a raised voice or a particular silence or a specific kind of tension meant something was about to go wrong. That body-level memory is not a flaw. It was an accurate response to what you were living. But the text message that just lit up your phone, it is not that. The person on the other side of it is most likely not the source of that original learning. And your nervous system, doing exactly what it was designed to do, firing exactly the signals it was trained to fire, it cannot know that yet. It fires first, it evaluates later. That's not dysfunction. That's the architecture. Understanding it doesn't make conflict easy, but it makes the reaction, yours and the person across from you, something other than a character statement. It makes it a nervous system doing its job. And that small shift in interpretation, from they don't care to they are overwhelmed, from I'm broken to I'm flooded, is often the only thing standing between a misread that compounds for years and a moment of recognition that changes the entire conversation. If someone in your life has ever been told they're too sensitive, or that they overreact, or that they just need to calm down, this is the science behind what that person is actually experiencing. Not a personality flaw. A nervous system responding exactly the way it learned to respond. Mind translator. The behavioral science behind what you feel, translated into something that actually makes sense. Subscribe so you don't miss what's next.